welcome back to our second session of bridging the gap between the LGs and the OGs. I hope you guys enjoy.
We will be singing As the Deer. Our next song will be Majesty. Please stand up.
Majesty,
us. You may be seated.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share to you my testimony. So, more than 2 years ago. So it was my first time to come into this church. So I was seated on that side. I was late because I've been doing that for like years. That I'm always going to church at divine service for years. So I remember that it was Pastor John was like preaching that day, and it's like I was observing the people around, and then it's like, oh, the church looks really nice, and yeah, it looks fancy, and yeah, I kind of like impressed with the church, and then I was like, okay, so next Saturday I'm going back to the church again. So I keep going back, but at the same time, like divine service. So I've been doing that for like, I don't know, more than 6 months. Well, before that, I met Abigail. So she's the first person that I met here. And then I think that was the third Sabbath that, oh, she said to me, hi, Riza. It's like, I was really shocked because most people don't really remember names. You know, when I came here, it's like, oh, hi, Riza. So, oh, she remembers my name. So I was like happy about it. Someone remembers my name. So I was like, that's amazing. So, and then after like 7 months, I started to, one time, something happened in my life. My mom got sick. And then I was really like broken and sad. And then the time for like, I'm like lost. I was like lost for years. And then that time like, when like, I really like open up to God that, Lord, I'm tired of doing this anymore. Like, running away from him. So it's time for me to like open up to him. I know that I'm lost. I was lost and broken, but I'm not really like admitting it to myself. Like I'm in a denial. No, I'm okay. But actually I am. And then, yeah, so I started to talk to the Lord like heart to heart. And then it was like, I think May when I prayed that week. To like, Lord, oh, I want to do something in church. Like, you know, step by step. Okay, so I went to the church, like, Sabbath school, and then Hope approached me. Oh, yeah, I met Hope as well. So, yeah, she's one of the person that I met, Abigail and Hope. It's like, oh, so there's, like, nice people in this church, and then, well, sorry, there's a lot of nice people, but sorry, I've met them, like, one by one, though, because there's, like, yeah. So yeah, so I'm like happy about it. And then I was sitting in there. That week I was praying, Lord, I want to do something in church. And then she approached me, oh, Risa, can you sing with me here? It's like, okay. I was really, oh, Lord, wow, that's so fast. He answered my prayer right away. Yeah, so yeah, I did the singing. And then I started to, you know, baby steps to go back to church. Like, before I just go to church just because, you know. I know you love me, God, but you know, I'm like away from him for a long time. Like I still go to church though every Saturday. I still do that, but now it's different. I started to like really open up to him and come back to him. I know I've heard some of the young adults here as well that what they're doing is like what I did before, you know, lost. So that's why I'm trying to reach out to that young adults as well. That you know, I've been there as well, but we'll just have to be open and open up to God, like accept him and Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you.
How many students do we have here? Okay, quite a number, so this is probably going to be appropriate. So I was raised Adventist, and for some reason, I just thought that I had to do something for God to help me, right? I had to be good so that somehow God helps those who are, walking in, following the rules and things like that. So I learned at Adventist schools and stuff like that. And then now, one time I'm in the Philippines, I'm at dental school. I was taking a class that was particularly difficult for me at the beginning. So, coupled with the fact that I developed an attitude towards the professor, I started doing very badly at that class. So, it's called pharmacology. So for me to actually proceed to clinicals, I had to pass pharmacology because there's no way that I'm going to start doing clinicals without passing it, but I was tanking the class. We had 3 major exams that contributed to the final grade, and I failed all of them. And I'm not even putting any effort at this point. And then towards the end of the semester, I started thinking, oh my gosh, if I fail this class, it means I'm not getting into clinicals, and what that means is that I'm going to have to wait 1 more year to take this class because it was only offered second semester, and my mom cannot afford to keep me here. So I started panicking, and now I'm thinking, what am I going to do? So day before the exam, bad idea. Day before the exam, I studied like nobody's business from morning till I don't even think I really slept. I was just trying to memorize as much as I can. For those who are doing medical courses, you know that pharmacology, you need to know drugs, you need to know symptoms, just a whole lot of things that you need to know about that. So I'm trying to memorize everything, and then I didn't sleep well. Day of the exam, I get into the exam room, I wrote, I think, a quarter of the exam, and then because I was tired, I fell asleep. So people are writing the exam, I'm fast asleep. And one of my friends, he was sitting behind me, he's like, how is she sleeping? This exam is hard. Is she done? So he finished, and when he was walking out, he kind of kicked my chair so that I could wake up. And then I woke up, I'm like, oh my gosh, people are getting out. I'm not done. I'm not even halfway. So now I panicked. Instead of reading the questions, I was now just, thank God it was multiple choice. I just started putting answers. And then I got out of the exam room and I went and I cried. And I said, God, this is where I need a miracle. I messed up, but I really, really need you to come through for me. So I went to the lady who was my guardian at the time, because I knew that in the Bible, parents have this special blessing that if they pray for their children, things happen. So I'm like, this is my mom here. So I went to her, I'm like, please pray for me. What I want you to do is say, God, please change the wrong answers to make them right answers, because I cannot fail this exam. And she looked at me and she was like, hey, like any other Adventist would say, like, okay, let's pray. And then you know how Adventists, when we're praying for a particularly desperate situation, we kind of say, God, let your will be done, but not really bold to say this is what we're. So she's like, comfort her, blah, 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 let your will be done. I was like, no, this is not what I want. I went back to my room and I cried. I said, God, I can't fail. I can't fail this class because you know my mom cannot afford to keep me here for 1 more year. I messed up. I wasn't studying. I wasn't serious, but I need you to come through for me. 2 days later, one of my classmates comes into the room, and then he's like, Grace, have you heard about your pharmacology result? I'm like, I don't want to hear about it. And everybody wants to know about it because the exam was hard. And then later I went up to him and I'm like, so tell me what happened. And then he says to me, you know what? You're the highest in that exam. And then I'm like, no way. He's like, actually, you're the only one who passed that class. So because of that, the teacher has said they're making your grade like the perfect score so that they can rate everyone's exam so that at least half of the class passes before they go and take the remedial exam. I couldn't believe it. So what that means is that, what that meant is because I had failed all my other exams and now I have like 100%, it meant that my overall grade was a pass. That experience taught me that no matter how desperate a situation is, God can still come through for us. We're all sinners, and that's the essence of why Jesus Christ came. There's so much pressure to be perfect because we're Adventist. There's so much pressure to do things right, and we expect that because I have done something right, then that's how God is going to come through for me. But we're sinners. We should just accept the grace of God and still go to him even if we have messed up, and he will come through for us. So may God bless you.
Afternoon, everybody. See the slides working? Oh, good. Perfect. Oh, this is very precious. So because we have a little bit longer today, and this is going to be more like a class, and you can certainly raise your hand and interact, I'm going to sit down because it's really more comfortable to sit, and we are going to get into Jesus and postmodernism. I would encourage you, if you have something to take notes with, if you've got a phone, you will be learning new terms, new concepts. Make sure. Okay. So first of all, maybe a silly question because you've already seen the advertising for this weekend, but who, at least prior to this weekend, has heard of postmodernism? Anybody, who has never heard this term whatsoever? You've never heard postmodern before? Okay, a few people. How many of you have heard of the term philosophy before? How many of you have sort of you break out in a rash and kind of panic when you hear the word philosophy? Like if you were to sit in a philosophy class, or if you had the option to take a philosophy class, you would say nope, and you would take pottery or swimming or something else. Most people kind of panic when they hear the term philosophy, but really all the term philosophy means is love of wisdom. And I think that's a biblical principle. We certainly want to value wisdom. And when we look at concepts like postmodernism, it's important to really spend a little bit of time here, because what tends to happen is we come up with these sort of buzz phrases in the church, whether it's postmodernism or the emergent church or spiritualism. And we never really ask what they mean. We just start throwing them around for things that we don't like. So if something shows up that we don't like, it's postmodernism. That's what that is. Or it's spiritualism, and we really don't understand the term. So this afternoon, we're going to really look at this concept of what postmodernism is, how it's affected society, the types of thinking that go along with it. Before we do, I want to invite you to bow your heads for a word of prayer. Dear Jesus, as we get into some heavier stuff today, as we look at some thought and some history, I pray that this makes sense. I pray that this helps us to understand those that we are trying to build relationship with. Give us wisdom, give us energy, and help us to enjoy our time learning together. And we pray, amen. All right. So the one thing I'm going to do first is I want to start. Actually, this is probably going to turn it on first. It always helps. Yeah. Kind of the key verses that go along with postmodernism when you start this study have to do with Jesus' mission as he describes it in John 18:37. He says, "For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the what? The truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." And the question that follows this verse sort of is the verse everyone throws out when they talk about postmodernism. This is Pilate's response to Jesus. What is truth? And that sort of launches this sort of postmodern mood or ethos. What I want to do is talk a little bit about epistemology first of all. Again, a lot of new terms. Epistemology is basically the study of how we know what we know. So when Pilate asked the question, what is truth? When you as a Christian say, what is truth? And what does the Bible say? Those are epistemological questions. And when we get into modernism and postmodernism, what comes after, it's really about epistemology. How do we know what we know? What can we know? Those kinds of things. Anyone who has taken a philosophy course has probably heard of Plato's allegory of the cave. I see some of you nodding. Raise your hand real quick. Who has been through Plato's allegory of the cave? Okay, so no spoiler alerts here. Don't ruin this for people who have never seen this story. And we're backing up a little bit. And let me just say this. Before we get to postmodernism proper, I think it's important to give you context for where it comes from. I don't want to just drop you into the deep end of postmodernism. Ideas aren't born in vacuums. They grow out of cultures. They grow out of experiences. But we're going to start here. Plato's allegory of the cave. First of all, you can see that we have three. I don't know if this pointer will go this far. Probably not. Is this working? Yeah, I'm not going to reach. You have three gentlemen that have been chained to this wall since the time of their birth. Now, it doesn't make any sense, but it's a story, it's an allegory, so don't be too literal with it. These three guys right there. And you can see that there is a fire, and there are some gentlemen in hoods, kind of shady looking, parading in the background. They've got these images, and they're casting shadows on the wall. And as far as they know, the world is what the shadows on the wall, that is their world. That's reality. Now, one guy, we're going to call him Larry. Larry somehow manages to get out of his shackles, and he crawls up out of the cave, and all of a sudden he's confronted with the real world. He sees real trees, he sees other people, he sees grass, he sees horses, and he thinks, this is incredible. So he goes back into the cave, and he tells his friends who've been chained to this wall, you're never going to believe it. He starts describing what he sees, and they almost beat him to death, saying, you are full of lies, you're trying to trick us, get out of here. And so Larry leaves, and his friends remain happily chained to the wall looking at the shadows. So just, let's treat this like a class. What do you think the point of this story is?
Where you stand determines what you see.
Okay, yes. Where you stand determines what you see. Very nice, succinct point. Very good. Any other observations? I'm not doing the teacher thing where I'm like, I have one idea in mind, I'm going to make you guess for it. That's not what I'm doing to you. That's a correct answer. But there's other correct answers too. Any other observations? What point might Plato be making? What other points is he making? Your perception is your reality. Very good. Very good. Yes?
Sometimes you have to leave your comfort zone to seek for truth.
Yes, sometimes you have to leave your comfort zone or what's familiar to see how things really are. All of us have what I call a normal, things that we just do, the way we live our life, and it's so close to us we don't really see beyond it until maybe we travel or we make friends with somebody with a different experience, and all of a sudden we get a different perspective. What about the idea that sometimes we call shadows reality? We think that we see something clearly, and that's not all there is to it. So I like to bring up epistemology because in the Adventist church, at least, and I think Christianity proper, you get debates that revolve around we can't trust our feelings, we need to go with reason, we need to think things through, we need to be critical thinkers, don't be emotional. I mean, that's a typical debate that you see, and what I want to bring out to you is this idea that we tend to oversimplify knowledge, and we create dichotomies between there's faith, and there's reason, and there's emotions, and there's logic, there's imagination, and all these different things. And what ends up happening is we start to, based on our experience, privilege one way of knowing the world over the others. So for some people, we think we have to be totally rational. And other people, no, you have to go with your gut feeling. No, you have to go this way. No, to understand the world, you have to go this way. And really, we have been blessed with many different faculties that all need to work together to understand the world. Mark 12:30, Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. So think of this in terms of your Christian experience. You are not just a thinking thing. You're not just a brain. You have a heart. And sometimes we forget that it's okay to have feelings in the church. You can feel things. You can respond to things. And you can also think about things. You have to... Christianity is not just an intellectual exercise. There was a philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard who, commenting on the Christian faith of his day, said there is something missing in Christianity and it's not information. But sometimes as Adventists, even today, we tend to be much more about information and a reason to forget there's other ways of experiencing and knowing the world. So, with that said, let's talk about the Enlightenment and the Cartesian cogito. So, isn't that exciting and fun terms to learn on a Sabbath afternoon? So this Enlightenment, and it's tricky. When we say the Enlightenment, it wasn't just like one thing. It was several things happening at once, but generally referring to the 17th century. And it launches with this experience called the Third Defenestration of Prague. If you've taken your history courses, if you remember this, sort of a delightful story of how Roman Catholic authorities were shutting down Protestant churches, even though the Protestant churches had license to have them. And so they called a meeting. The Protestant authorities got together, and they said, you can't do this to us. And they took some of the people who the local Catholic authorities were having shut down churches, and they defenestrated them, which means they threw them out the window. That was a thing back then. You had defensors back then. And I've often thought, like, how much more exciting would our board meetings be? Would annual council be if we had officers like, you can table a motion, or we could vote to throw someone out the window. Which one do you want to do? Let's go out the window. It'd be great. You'd have to maybe build, shorter buildings. You don't want to really hurt anybody. But this act between Protestants and Catholics was sort of the tipping point, the cherry on top that launches this huge conflict that we call, wait for it. No, it's on. Is it not going? Is the battery, did it die? Oh, I need to point it at something. What happened? Okay. Talk amongst yourselves. What's your favorite verse in the Bible? There we go. The 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War is this incredibly bloody conflict between Catholics and Protestants. It began as a conflict between these religious groups, and at the end of it, 20% of the German population died. 8 million people were killed in this conflict. Now think about if you were a citizen there and you're watching these two denominations. Let's say the Adventists picked a fight with the Baptists, and you had this massive war, this massive battle, millions of people died. How would that shape your perception of religion? Would you be like, hooray, I love it, everyone's dying, let's take out those Catholics and Protestants? Or would you start to get a little cynical about the church? Would you start asking some questions about church authority? You might have some issues with the faith, like, what are we doing here? This is a horrific battle. This is ugly, it's not worth it. And so this starts launching some questions about church, and not just like local churches, but like church in general, church authority. And you have philosophers such as Voltaire, who shows up, and he starts writing things like this: those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Now, what do you think he might have in mind commenting at this time or after this time? Right. The Bible, Jesus, the Christian church, if they can make you believe that somehow it's okay to kill these other people who disagree with you, then they can make you do these horrible things. It is dangerous to be right in matters on which the established authorities are wrong. If you're on the wrong side of theology, you could lose your life. You could have a valid point. You could critique the medieval church. You could critique, the Protestants and the Protestant Reformation. You could critique this religious body, but it's going to be dangerous. And then he says this: ours is assuredly the most ridiculous, the most absurd, and the most bloody religion which has ever infected this world. Your Majesty, writing to one of the authorities of the day, will do the human race an eternal service by extirpating this infamous superstition. Some strong words. Interestingly enough, part of Voltaire is buried in hallowed grounds and the other part is not. He sort of waffled between his faith experience. But you understand why he might feel this way. John Locke shows up and he says, to love truth for truth's sake is the principal part of human perfection in this world and the seed plot of all their virtues. We are born to be, if we please, rational creatures, but it is use and exercise only that make it so. The knowledge of man cannot extend beyond his own experience. So you're getting these philosophers who are starting to respond to this 30 Years' War, these two religious bodies that have been fighting each other. And you can kind of pick up on some of the main values of the Enlightenment here. He says, by nature, we are rational creatures, but we have to use that reason. Otherwise, we're going to lose it. We need to have genuine experience. We can't just believe in what the authorities tell us unless we need to have a real serious experience with it to make it true. David Hume says passion is a primitive existence, or if you will, a primitive mode of existence. So right there, just what is he already putting primacy on in terms of how you know the world and what you should be relying on? Should you be relying on your emotions? No. What is he saying? What do we need to elevate? What do you think that he would say we need to elevate? Of all the ways to know the world. Reason. Right. not your emotions, not your passion. A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence. I need to see some facts. The Christian religion not only was at first attended with miracles, but even at this day cannot be believed by any reasonable person without one. So what he is saying is, if you're going to believe in this Christian religion, it's a lot of supernatural stuff, it's no reason, and you really start seeing how we're now moving away from a church authority and we're moving towards the primacy of reason and experience and scientific method. Now, there's a lot of Enlightenment philosophers, but one of the most important for what we're going to talk about today is René Descartes, who came up with this term, cogito ergo sum. Now, Descartes was a guy who, like many other people back then, was sort of sick of the way the church was fighting, sick of looking at the deceptions some of the churches had, some of the power moves. And by the way, do we still see some ugly things in church? Do you see denominations and movements? Do you see anywhere, maybe south of your border, where Christianity and politics have sort of touched against each other a little bit? Right. And so René Descartes, being in a situation, seeing there's superstitious, elements in certain parts of the faith, seeing the abuses in the faith, he says, look, I'm tired of being deceived. I'm tired of not knowing what's true, so I'm going to figure out what's true. So he empties all his experience. And what he does, he says, I'm going to take anything anybody's ever told me, and I'm just going to write it off. I can't trust that because people lie, right? You ever been lied to? We've all been lied to, so I can't trust that. I'm going to take away my feelings because feelings can be deceptive. Take that away. I'm going to take traditions. I'm going to throw those out because traditions might be based on a lie. He broke it down. He said, so what do I have left? And the only thing he could think of was that he was thinking. And so he came up with this little phrase, cogito ergo sum. Even if you've never taken philosophy, you've probably heard of this. I think, therefore, I am. Because if I doubt the fact that I'm thinking, that means I'm thinking. And so that, that I've kind of narrowed things down to its most basic level. And because this kind of became the cultural mood, reason, scientific method, we are primarily as human beings thinking things, we get some values out of that, some major beliefs. And here are some major beliefs that come out of the Enlightenment and move their way into 19th century and a little bit beyond. First of all, human beings, you and me, are primarily thinking things. That's what you are. You're a thinking thing. Because we are primarily reasonable, that when according to Descartes, when you still human beings down to their essence, we think, we think, therefore we are, so we're thinking things. Reason and rationality are elevated over feelings and intuition. That doesn't mean there aren't deep feelers in the Enlightenment in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, but predominantly we're going to look at reason. There is a belief that says reason and science and invention are going to conquer nature and solve all of our problems. And finally, eventually human beings will solve all of our problems. So we go to modernity. This is late 1800s to mid 1900s. And let me ask you a question, those of you who maybe have done a little church history. What religious body shows up in the mid to late 1800s that might be relevant to you? Seventh-day Adventism. Be bold. It's all right. Don't be shy. Seventh-day Adventism shows up. So you can kind of see the line of thought that's flowing here. When we get to modernity, we've got industrialization. So we've got factories now. We've got more techniques. We have systemization that's happening. We've got the steam press, and things are going on assembly lines, and we're getting much more sophisticated. So we have this thing called modernity. Modernity at a glance. You've got what we call the myth of human progress. And when I say the term myth, I'm not necessarily referring to fables. I'm just saying, I'm meaning this in just a meaningful story, a big story. The myth of human progress. Human beings will continue to progress until we achieve perfection. Practical applications of science and technology. Refining technique to be objectively true and better. So when you look at modern art, it wasn't just that we're doing new things and we're moving away from traditional images. They were experimenting with cubism and impressionism, saying, I am going to find techniques in art that are objectively better and perfect. We're very concerned with what is objectively true, what is provable, things like that. Shift from divine themes to personal expression and experimentation in the arts, and antagonistic towards tradition and Victorian culture. So how does this impact faith? First of all, because reason is prime, We have sort of a debate-oriented faith. There are stories of how we used to do things when the Adventist church was forming. You get the best debater, the best evangelist, and they'd hop on their horse and they'd ride into town and find the local theologian and they'd challenge him to a fight. You know, the seventh day is the Sabbath. Prove me wrong. You know, and they would get going at it, and then that's how you'd win the debate and hopefully win converts. Very debate-oriented. Very linear and progressive. You know, history is unfolding this way. We can see we've got some trajectory. You know, we're working towards a great climax, which for Seventh-day Adventists would be the second coming. They abandon, and this is not Seventh-day Adventism, but general Protestant denominations would abandon miracles for more natural explanations. So they weren't possessed by the devil. You know, they had maybe a seizure, you know, things like that. There wasn't a virgin birth. You know, Mary was accosted by a Roman centurion. It was covered. They're looking for more naturalistic explanations. This is starting to happen late 1800s, early 1900s. The myth of human progress due to science. Again, we are just going to continue to develop, and we're going to conquer nature and solve all our problems. And then you have social reform movements to usher in a golden age. If we can just get enough temperance societies and get people to quit using tobacco and drinking, and we can make things perfect, and we will achieve what was called the millennium. We're going to have this perfect 1,000 years, then Jesus can come. So it's very much a hands-on kind of approach to faith. Now, modernity and Adventist faith. Proof texting. Anyone know what a proof text? Everyone had seen proof texting before? What I'm going to do is I'm going to get into this debate, and I'm going to get a 60, 70, 80 texts where they have anything to do with what I'm talking about or not. I'm just going to drop them on you, and I'm going to win the discussion. So I don't necessarily want to get all the context. I don't need all the history. I just need to cherry pick all these proof texts in order to win this discussion. You've got mass evangelism and literature distribution. So it's not so much this always happens in every era, but it's less of a personal one-on-one relationship thing versus we need to print out flyers, and we need posters, and we need mass meetings. We need to really streamline everything that we're doing. You have charts and timelines. Those of you who have grown up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you've probably seen a prophetic timeline before. Very mathematical, very precise, very complicated, and that was revolutionary back then. We are applying the scientific method and reason to faith. And so you'd have people like William Miller and other evangelists, you know, who would go down and they would show you all the charts, how they've worked out Bible prophecy, tying it to historical events. So very reason-oriented, and of course just a debate and argumentative style. So that was a crash course in Enlightenment and modernity. The big things you need to know is that coming into the mid-19th century, modernity is very much about the myth of human progress. We are just continuing to master everything. We're making huge strides. We're going to conquer everything. Less supernatural, very optimistic about human capabilities, and the primacy is on reason. We have science, and we just know things, and we can work it out. And then postmodernism shows up. And with postmodernism, how I'm going to approach this is there's a lot we could talk about in postmodernism. I am going to talk about the three main theorists, three main philosophers who contribute some ideas, and then we're going to do a little bit of discussion here as we try to work some stuff out. First person to know, Jacques Derrida, and they're all from France, by the way. You know, they're all connected with France. Born on July 15, 1930 in El Bayer, Algeria. Both parents came from old Algerian Jewish families, and he died in 2004 in Paris, France. His family lived in a tumultuous place and time. Algeria rebelled against colonial French rule in the 1950s and 60s, and when Algeria won its independence from France in 62, the Jews were forced out of their professions. The Jewish population was 140,000 in 1942, and by 1974 it was 500. But here is what's important. Derrida's parents were among the Algerian Jews who fled the new regime in the early 1960s. When he was 12 years old, he went to attend the Lycée de Ben Aknoun and was told to leave without an explanation. Basically, the reason he was kicked out of school as a kid was we have too many Jews. We met our quota. Now try to think of what that would do to you or do to your child if you sent them to school and they got sent home. We already have too many of your kind here, so you need to go somewhere else. Do you think that would maybe stay with you, maybe bother you a little bit, or do you think, it's fine, I don't want to go to school anyway? This submission to an authority without an explanation stuck with him. And so it's important, don't make smart people angry because they come back and wreak havoc on thought. So he, later in life, as he studies philosophy and he starts writing and lecturing, he comes up with this idea called deconstruction. And so often when you talk about postmodernism, you hear deconstructionism or the idea of deconstruction. Here's basically what it is. It's a way of reading concerned with decentering or unmasking the center of a text. Derrida believed Western thought revolves around a center, whether that's truth or essence with a capital E or God, which guarantees its meaning. There is something in the universe that guarantees objective meaning. The problem with centers, according to Derrida, is they attempt to exclude or marginalize things. Now, why do you think Derrida would be concerned about being excluded and marginalized? Did he have anything in his experience that might make him concerned about that? The longing for a center creates binary opposites. For him, Jews, non-Jews. And its centers want to freeze what he calls the play of binaries, this give and take of different meanings. But humans form conceptual pairs in order to interpret reality, and we shouldn't privilege one over the other. So here's a good image to illustrate. What is this a picture of? Is it faces or a vase? Yeah, there's a problem. So you look at that. It could be both. Has everyone see it? Who's still working on it? Like, I don't see these faces. I'm not seeing what you. Yeah. Here's another one. What's this a picture of? Who sees a man? Let me ask. How many of you see the image of a man? Who sees a dog? If you see a dog, who sees a woman holding a child? Yeah, and who sees a street? Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on here. And so what Derrida is suggesting, any statement, any text, and text not just meaning what is written. Text can be a picture, it can be a film, text can be anything you see in the world. There are more than one meaning. You may want objective reality, but it's not there. And we try to put false centers on things to exclude other things. It's just a man. It's not a dog, and it's not a woman holding a baby. Yeah, but clearly she's there. Here's another good image to illustrate this. How many triangles are in that picture? Just stare at it for a while. How many of you, the longer you stare at this, you see like one triangle emerge, and there's some other triangles? How many of you, it's lulling you to sleep right now? You've eaten, and you're just sort of like doing this. Yeah, right. So what Derrida suggests is if you're going to be a good deconstructionist, you have to look at a text and you have to see the different meanings doing this. Does that make sense? You can't just lock it down and exclude other interpretations. You have to know every text is going to be doing this. And you have to pay attention to the other meanings. All hierarchies, so when we set up a hierarchy, which would include reason at the top, emotions down here, faith down here, Americans up here, Canadians here, any hierarchy you can think of. Quebec down here, Alberta up here, whatever you want to do. He says all hierarchies, they're unstable. And he says deconstructing is a political exercise. We need to see this, what he calls free play of binaries in all texts. In other words, every time you try to lock down a meaning too hard, you're excluding perspectives that may be valuable. And so you can see now how it's a reaction against modernism. Modernism is very objective and concrete, and this is the way. And he's saying, I don't know. I think there might be more than one interpretation. Now, one thing that's important to illustrate, when we talk about deconstruction, it's not destruction. Derrida does not just destroy everything. Nothing has meaning. That's not what he's saying. But he's saying that sometimes we are given messages. We are given structures. We are given images, and we need to take them apart to see what's really happening. So his famous phrase that he's known for, this is a little bit of a paraphrase, there is no world outside the text. And so what he means by that is the world in this perspective is a text. Reading everything in this room, facial expressions, the Bible, movies, anything is a text. And everything, when it comes to that text, when it comes to that reality out there, is an interpretation. In other words, every statement is simply an interpretation of objective reality. It's not necessarily reality itself. You following so far? So when someone says, this is what the research says, This is what the Bible says. This is what this is a picture of. Derrida would say that's an interpretation. Let's think about that for a little bit. How many interpretations have you had to make just to get through your day? How did you know to sit in that chair and not stand on it? How do you know, you have to interpret based on culture and based on social norms. You have to figure this out. How do you know how to read a text? You have to interpret certain things. Why do we still have fights over Scripture? So you can see there is interpretation involved. And so the question is, and I want you to kind of maybe break up in groups of 2 or 3, did Jesus ever deconstruct anything? So as a postmodernist coming and saying, okay, we have this nice picture of a well-intact, well thought out, documented timelines, charts, tracks, this perfect faith, or this perfect scientific theory. And there's no perfect theory, but you understand what I'm saying. Derrida will come along, I'm going to take that apart and see what's really going on. Did Jesus ever do anything like that? So talk to each other. Groups 2 or 3, spend a few moments. Did Jesus ever deconstruct anything? Did he ever say, look, that's the given interpretation, but I'm going to take it apart and I'm going to show you something else? All right, let's bring it in. Go ahead, raise hand. Someone over on this side, did you talk about, did Jesus ever deconstruct something? I see, give me an example. What did he take apart?
The Sabbath.
Okay, the Sabbath. Unpack that a little bit more. You're gesturing to...
Proposal in our group anyway.
Sure.
He healed on the Sabbath.
Okay.
And challenged people's understanding of what it means to keep it.
Yeah, so did the religious leaders of Jesus, did they have an interpretation of how to keep the Sabbath? Yes. And did Jesus sort of upset that interpretation and give a new interpretation? No, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. If your ox falls in the ditch, you're going to pull it out. How much more valuable is this human being over here? We're going to do some healing. Right. Over here, anybody else? What else did Jesus deconstruct? Yes. Social norms. Give me an example. Yeah. Nobody, you were not, even if it was your wife, you didn't talk to a woman in public, much less a Samaritan woman, much less one at a particular time of day when you know that she probably has some shady things going on in her social life. He approaches her, and what's really crazy is Jesus would have had a bucket, to draw from the well. He sends out with his disciples to town, so he puts himself at the service of this woman. Can you give me a drink? Yeah, not a normal thing to have happen. Totally against the social norms, give a new interpretation. Anybody else? Did Jesus deconstruct anything? The temple. So, how we worship. Did Jesus physically deconstruct some money changers' tables? Yeah, he totally upset, what was going on in there, cheating people and all those kinds of things. So you have lots of examples of Jesus deconstructing. My favorite, what about the Sermon on the Mount? You have heard it said. But I say. Totally different perspective. And by the way, because of my congested brain, I forgot to give this little preface. What happens between modernity that helps launch postmodern thought? Now keep in mind, if you are a modernist and you believe in the myth of human progress and our science is going to master nature, we're going to solve all our problems, what happens in the early 20th century to upset that myth? The Great Wars. It's really hard to be optimistic about human nature and our science when we kill 20, 30, 40 million people in horrific ways. And we see propaganda used to lead people to do horrible things. There's some disillusionment that shows up. And that's when you start getting this postmodern reaction saying, what, I don't know that we're that great. I don't know that our interpretations of reality and our reason is that helpful. We're doing some pretty awful stuff. I have some questions. Good. So let's move on to the next postmodern philosopher, Michel Foucault. He was born October 15th, 1926, and he died in 1984. Wealthy, socially conservative, middle-class family. He was Roman Catholic. He was an altar boy. He described himself as a juvenile delinquent. He claimed his father was a bully. He was obsessed with self-harm and reckless behavior. He was counseled because he had a suicide attempt, and counseling revealed he had a struggle with his sexual orientation. You think about growing up in the 30s and 40s in a conservative, wealthy Roman Catholic family. How easy would it be to come out as gay? Not very. And so he struggled. And he wrote a book called Discipline and Punish. This book takes a look at prison systems in the late 1700s. And he made some interesting observations. He said, way back then, people would take a criminal and they would execute them publicly. They would hang them, burn them, do horrible things. But there was a problem, because sometimes people started feeling bad for the criminal. People started sympathizing, this doesn't feel right, this is kind of gross. We're all gathered here to watch somebody suffer, and they realize this isn't working. And so we had to get more sophisticated. We had to be more subversive. And so he takes a look as we've progressed, and he actually says where we are now is more dangerous. We are a civilization of surveillance. We are watching to make sure nobody deviates from the norms. We have so many ways to watch people, not just law enforcement. We've got cameras, and we've got all kinds of things going on to make sure people stay within a society's given parameters. And he says, if you really want to understand a culture, you have to go to the prison to get an accurate picture of it. Because a prison is a microcosm, is a mini picture of what a society's values are. Because the whole reason you're in prison is because you deviated from the norm, right? What a society deems acceptable. And so now a prison is like a concentrated version of that society to get you to behave in certain ways. And so for Foucault, he started looking around at society and saying, what are the systems of power in every single culture there is, from your family to the city you live in to the country you live in? What are all the systems of power that are working to shape you to be a certain kind of person? So think about, what are some systems that you have here, right here in Edmonton, to shape you to be a certain kind of citizen? Education, school. The school is totally unbiased. They just take this, they're nothing but objective, right? All schools are objective, all the curriculum, all the textbooks have no bias or opinions whatsoever, right? No. What other systems do we have in place to get you to be a certain kind of person? Banking systems. Yep. What else? Health systems. So there's a theorist, a postmodern philosopher named James K. Smith, who talks about secular liturgy. In other words, every culture has certain liturgies or rituals that are designed to direct the desires of your heart towards a certain end. He has a great example. It's one in the States that happens next month on a Friday. Okay. Boldly, go ahead and shout it out. Black Friday, right? It's going to happen. And he says, think about this. Think of how Black Friday goes down. First of all, you have to search the scriptures. The advertisement comes out. You've got to search through these scriptures. You've got to figure out what is it, and then you have to find that object that is going to complete your life. It's going to be that 80-inch TV at Costco. You know, the curved 4K one that my wife told me no several times. It's not going to happen, but I need this television. It's very, very important. And so we will then get up and we will make a pilgrimage at 4 a.m. to the store, and we will wait in line. We will wait in line. We will engage in a crusade and holy war. If we think somebody is going to get that last TV, we will elbow people. There are people trampled every single year, in chaos, and then we get it and we bring it home and we're complete. There is a liturgy designed to make us consumers. Football, sporting events, people dress up. And they participate in something that they act like they did something on the field, but it's this, they're part of something bigger than themselves. We won. You didn't do anything. You sat in the stands, you ate nachos. You didn't do anything. But it feels like we're part of something bigger. We have symbols, and we go and we cheer, and we're a part of things. There's even sacred meals that we eat there. We have communion in church, but you go to a sporting event and you're going to have a pretzel and maybe some soda. If you go to the mall to participate in shopping, at least for us, you have Orange Julius, and you might go get one of Annie's pretzels or cookies or something. There's these different rituals designed to make us into certain types of people. So Foucault said, you have to pay attention to see what are the power mechanisms that work in every single culture. And then he wrote another book called The Archaeology of Knowledge. He said, even the terms we use, like the term science, who got to determine what science is and what science isn't? There are power plays involved in how we get to define certain concepts. Fair and unfair, just and unjust, rich and poor, science, faith, imagination. Who is it that gets the final say? It's because we have to become archaeologists of knowledge. We have to uncover where are these power mechanisms coming from. We have to expose them. We have to expose these arbitrary definitions. And then he said we have to become nonconformists. We just have to do our own thing. Now, even nonconformists have their own culture that they conform to, certain norms. But his idea, and you could understand why, because he was somebody who experienced, from his perspective, sexual repression and prejudice, and so you can see how this plants the seed to cast all this stuff off. There were social systems that hurt him growing up with his struggles, and so you can kind of see some of the impetus of why he'd want to throw all that off. And his statement is, knowledge is power. So talk amongst yourselves. What forces are shaping you right now? What forces shape you in the church? Go ahead, a couple minutes. What are some current forces that are working to shape you? And shape you into what? In church or outside, in anything. Do church and in your just day-to-day life. minute here. All right, let's share a little bit. So let's start in church. Raise your hand, class. What forces are working to shape you in church? Where do you see it happening? Yes. Doctrines. Okay. So we've got a list of fundamental beliefs. If you want to get baptized, you need to conform to this particular statement, and then hopefully you'll be a certain kind of person. Okay. Where else? Where else do you see inside the church forces? Go ahead. Sorry, one more time. The Bible, right. So we've got our sacred text, and we're reading it, and hopefully that is transforming us to be more Christ-like, although the Pharisees demonstrated that you can even read Scripture and miss Jesus when he's standing right in front of you. Yeah. Okay, your own personal relationship with Jesus. And who is modeling that for you? Jesus. But how did you even learn about it? The Bible, or perhaps speakers or pastors or counselors, and so you've got certain discipleship systems at work. What else? What else do you see inside the church? Yes? Music. Unpack that more for me.
Music makes us feel a certain way, makes us do something,
Okay.
makes us think of certain things.
Sure. We have certain songs that we like, and the lyrics stay embedded in our head, and we look forward to singing them that sort of reinforces certain ideas, right? Anybody else inside the church? Yes? Elders and board members. And how hard are they working to make you a certain kind of person? It's very hard, and their approach will vary. There are some, I remember hearing about a church. The pastor finally had left, been there for a long time, and the control in that church had become so toxic, they actually found a file where the head elder, who was a doctor, and the pastor had actually written files up on members and had little 3x5 cards prescribing behavior for different members. I mean, really super controlling, toxic church. You are very blessed to be at Edmonton South. There are some scary, scary places out there. Where else do you see? How are you being shaped in the church? Yeah. Yeah, whoever you relate to. Your relationships in the church, your friendships, what gets modeled for you there, what gets reinforced. Anything else in the church? Yes.
The culture of the society that Adventist church is in.
Okay.
The country.
Yes. There's some Canadian flavors to Edmonton, South. Very different. If you go to a church in Savannah, Georgia, it's going to be a little bit different. If you go to a church in Riverside, California, it might be a little bit different. What else? Parents.
And our friends.
Yeah. What about, yeah. 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 What about Pathfinders? Whole system, designed. They've got camporees, and they've got sashes, and they've got badges, they've got honors, they've got very specific ways to disciple you. Yeah. So outside of the church, what worked to shape you this week? Yeah. Social media. And how is your social media shaping you?
Well, me personally, I don't watch the news on TV. I
Okay.
like to watch it on social media. So
Okay.
based on what I've watched and come up with my perspective on certain.
Okay. Helps your worldview stay current. What else has shaped you this week? Anything that you noticed? Yeah. The weather? Yeah. What about people's reporting the weather? It's going to be totally warm today. It's totally fine. And you get out like, not again. Okay. What else? On Twitter last week, there was a big mess, and it's still going on within the Christian community, but it reflects society at large. John MacArthur, if any of you follow this, John MacArthur is a well-known conservative Bible teacher, was at an independent fundamentalist, I believe it's fundamentalist Baptist convention full of male pastors. And as they all sat there, the person interviewing Dr. MacArthur said, "What do you think of Beth Moore, who's a female preacher and author?" And before the interviewer could even finish what he was saying, John MacArthur said, go home. Just go home. Now, what is at work there? And of course, all the male pastors there laughed and thought it was funny. Now, right away, you hear that. How do you have like a strong reaction in your heart? Would make you a little bit frustrated. If Pastor Kingsley and I were up here and he said, "What do you think of Pastor, Beth Williams?" and I just said, "Go home," and then all the men laughed in the room. Women, how would you feel? Yeah, sad. How do you get? Not sad. You'd be angry, a little upset about that. Just that cavalier dismissing of somebody else's ministry. And so you have in that statement somebody who, number one, has a theology that prevents women from saying anything in the pulpit, and number two, that go home is not just implying go home from preaching. It means go home in the kitchen and take care of your family and your kids, where a woman's supposed to be. Now, there is a system of thought that promotes that. Do you know what it's called? Patriarchy. That can be a loaded term, just like feminism can be a loaded term, depending on your experience with it. But it's this idea that certain elements in society are structured in favor of men, not of women. And there are some horror stories inside and outside the church related to equal pay and harassment. And so there are, and those, even though it's better, those things still linger and they still happen. And so for Foucault, as a postmodern, he says you need to look at all these systems, the traditions, the cultures, everything that have been handed to you, and you need to start asking some questions. Who in power is benefiting from this system? That's the postmodern Foucault question. Does that make sense? All right. Last postmodern theorist we'll look at. François Lyotard, born on August 10, 1924. In France, he studied philosophy at Sorbonne in the late 1940s. Lyotard hoped to encourage an Algerian fight for independence from France and a social revolution. And here's what he says in a book called The Postmodern Condition. He says, we have a crisis of narratives. Now, keep in mind, I know we're moving really, really fast. What is the big myth in modernity, in the Enlightenment? What was the big myth? The myth of human progress. He's saying we're having a crisis of narratives. And then he says, science has always been in conflict with narratives. I define postmodernism as incredulity, sort of skepticism, towards meta-narratives. This incredulity is undoubtedly a product of progress in the sciences, but progress in turn presupposes it. He speaks of what the mercantilization or the capitalization of knowledge. Scientific knowledge does not represent the totality of knowledge. But let's focus in on this one statement he makes. Postmodernism is incredulity towards meta-narratives. That's a mouthful for a lot of people. So incredulity simply means skepticism, kind of taken aback by something. But what is a meta-narrative? First of all, let's take meta out of there. What is a narrative? It's a story, right. So what is meta-narrative? What do you think he means by that? Like a bigger, overarching story. And for Lyotard, he is questioning this meta-narrative of science. We have this myth that says science is totally objective. It's totally value-free. It's making everything better. And he's saying, I have a question about that. I don't think every scientist is as bias-free as they think they are. I don't think every study that comes out is as unbiased as it claims to be. And I take a look at this myth of human progress, and I don't think that we've progressed as much as we thought we would. And so I think science, with all its, again, this is not anti-science, so don't please take it this way, but science with all of its blessings and benefits and advances has some shortfalls that they refuse to acknowledge. And they need to realize that just like philosophy, just like faith, we are all limited in our ability to grasp the world absolutely, and science has gotten a little bit too big for its britches. And he suggests that science kind of appeals to itself. It's true because science. It's true because logic. Like it just kind of proves itself, almost like a circular reasoning, according to Lyotard. So you need to question that a little bit. And so whenever you get this big story that comes out, we are here, science has done this, and science will continue to do this, he says, I have questions. I don't know that that's always true. But you can understand from a Christian perspective how this idea might be threatening. As Christians, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, do we have a meta-narrative? Is there a big story? What is the Adventist Christian term for the big story? It's two words. Great. The great controversy that explains everything. It's the big overarching story. Leotard, and many people who misinterpret Leotard would say, that's a threat to Christianity. We have to throw out postmodernism. He's trying to undo our big story. I don't know if that's true. Talk about this. Do Seventh-day Adventist Christians, have we ever deconstructed a meta-narrative? Are there certain stories that have been told that we have deconstructed as Christians? So groups 2 or 3 or 4, think about this. Do Christians ever deconstruct or take apart meta-narratives? Are we ever skeptical about big stories? In groups of 2 or 3, see if you can answer this question. Any big stories that Christians, not so sure of? It's all right. I appreciate the gesture. Thank you so much. All right, let's see what you got. Start on this side. What meta-narratives do Christians take issue with? Anybody? Or do we just embrace all the stories we're told?
Well, we were talking about creationism and how there's the whole question now whether it was literal or
Yes.
an evolutionary component to it.
Yes, and so that would be one. So Christians, historically anyway, have taken like Darwinian evolution and said, you know what, I don't know that I agree with that. I think that God was involved and it wasn't just chance. So the origins of life, that would be one meta-narrative that we're told that Christians would ask some questions about. Yes?
Yeah, I think Protestantism is also the construction of the overarching story of Catholics,
Yes.
our relationship with God.
Yes. That's a perfect example, especially for Seventh-day Adventist Christians. If you have attended a Revelation or a prophecy seminar, we go through the history of the medieval Christian church and how we have the Holy Roman Empire. This is the church. If you're outside of it, you're not going to heaven. We might burn you at the stake. Inquisition, all those types of images. And Protestants are saying, you know what? I don't know that system is correct. I don't know that I need an earthly priest between me and God. And I don't know that it's okay to behave, in certain ways. And I have questions about this theology. And so you've got this breakaway. And so Adventists in our prophetic identity deconstruct some of the general narratives of other Christian movements. Any other examples? Okay, a little bit.
State of the dead.
Okay, yeah, State of the Dead would be another one. Yeah, for Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and not just Seventh-day Adventist Christians, there's others as well. When you die, you don't go straight to heaven, and you don't burn eternally in hell. We're going to take apart that meta-narrative. I don't think that story is true. Yes?
What about the search for life and extraterrestrials outside of our
Yeah.
Earth?
UFOs, yeah. We'd say, no, I don't think that's, I think that search is not going to work. That idea, it's called panspermia, is the name of the theory, where there was aliens who flew by and they put out, some, using advanced technology, and they sort of planted the seeds for the world to show up, and we're saying, I don't buy that. Any other ones? Yeah.
I think, especially in the youth and young adult category, we're often deconstructing meta-narratives that we're told growing up into the church about the identity of Seventh-day Adventism.
Okay.
Or I think maybe also you mentioned like God and the problem of suffering, sort of all these big questions. We've been told there's certain answers to these as we're growing up, and
Sure.
now we're sort of re-examining.
Right. So this is, thankfully I wasn't told this, but some people have this idea, well, if you're suffering, it must mean you made God angry, and that's why suffering happens. And, people go like, I don't know that that's the picture of God that I'm going to subscribe to. That's not, I don't think so. But yeah, some of those overly simplistic answers, we sort of deconstruct and I think there's more here to study. The idea of the Sabbath. Most Christians attend church on Sunday, but going back to that elitist point we talked about earlier, what about the idea that there are Christians outside of the Adventist church? That it's not just going to be Seventh-day Adventists in heaven. And depending on who you talk to, that's a hard thing for people to grab onto. And so we start deconstructing some of these things. Yes?
Yes, I have a fear though, because from one deconstruction to another deconstruction, are we going to deconstruct God?
Yes. Yeah. No, and I think you're asking the right question. And this is why it becomes very, very important and also very dangerous. This is one of the challenges we have. Postmodernism, when it comes to communication studies, which is the area I teach in, falls under what we call critical theory or critical tradition. And critical tradition is very interested in exposing power dynamics. What are the systems of power at work that marginalize some groups and include others? But the problem is, even though it's a noble cause, everything can be deconstructed at some point. You can keep going with this and going until you've got nothing left. And so it's kind of like if you give an unskilled surgeon a scalpel, they can start cutting out more than needs to be cut out. From surgery, that makes sense. Every metaphor, every analogy breaks down. And so it's important to keep in mind that deconstruction is not destruction. Deconstruction is simply asking a question. Is this valid? Is this true? Are there certain pieces to this idea or this concept that have been invented to keep somebody in power, or not? And so those are the questions we wrestle with. So I think some people can take it too far based on perhaps even personal issues and deconstruct God. But the other thing I've seen happen is people will deconstruct a concept of God, not God himself. They might have grown up with a very abusive picture of God, a very hateful picture of God, and they deconstruct that. I have a friend of mine who was a pastor's wife, and she's on her own now because her husband had some certain ideas that would not be in harmony with Adventism or a marriage between, a monogamous, couple, And she got out of that, and that whole experience affected her view of God, and so she had to do a lot of deconstructing work. What I've been told about God, what I've thought about God. And she didn't give up God, but she gave up a certain perception of God that was damaging. Does that make sense? And so all of us, I think, have a work to do in that respect. Jesus came and deconstructed a picture of God that people had by showing up and saying, we've got the wrong idea here. So deconstruction can be taken to extremes. We can just use it to be non-committal and tear apart everything. That's often the caricature of postmodernism. They don't believe in any truth. You have your truth, I've got my truth, and all truth, it's all relative. That's a very extreme caricature of postmodernism. I'm not saying that isn't out there. And the easiest way to refute that, if someone says there's no such thing as truth, well, how do you know that? Okay, and that idea defeats itself. But what the value of postmodernism, and this gets into, is it frozen again? I think we're froze again. Get that next slide here real quick. But what postmodernism teaches us, for those of us who've grown up in a church, very traditional church, a church with a strong identity and a strong theology and a strong subculture, and Adventists have a very well-defined subculture. We've been around long enough. We've got our own lingo. You can be an SDA going to the ABC at the GC. And confuse people with what you're talking about. But we've been around long enough. We've got a very strong identity that way. And so it's very threatening to have these type of questions asked, but they're not bad questions. So here's some major lessons if you want to reach out to postmoderns. First of all, you have to have humility in your dialogue. If you come after it and say, look, here's the proof text, and here's the charts, and I'm right, and you need to be part of the remnant, if you're not, and do that kind of, people are just going to walk away. And I have friends right now, my former intern pastor who's at seminary right now, they're doing evangelism in Berkeley, California, and every day there's some street preacher just out there screaming at people on the college campus. It's not effective at all. Inclusiveness and respect for other people's stories. Adventists, because of our strong identity, sometimes it's called othering. We will talk about other people in a very condescending way. Well, they're not Adventist. Well, they go to church on this day. Well, they didn't do that. And that sort of condescending attitude or writing off of other people's experience. Well, they're good, but they're Lutheran. That kind of an idea, it's not helpful. And so those kind of ideas, and whether it's people of other faith, or we talk disparagingly about, those liberals, or those conservatives, or the people in the LGBTQ community, those radical feminists. That sort of attitude for a postmodern, it's red flags everywhere as soon as they hear you talking like that. They want to know that you have a regard for other groups, a respect. Other thing is postmoderns are skeptical towards grand claims, but appreciate personal stories. So you don't start with a sweeping narrative. You start with, here's what was meaningful for me. When I went through depression, when I went through anxiety, when I was struggling in college, here's what was meaningful for me. Don't break out the great controversy on day one, unless they asked about it, if they heard about it. Does that make sense? So don't start with the grand claims. Start with what Jesus is doing in your life personally. They are keenly aware of power dynamics. We've seen like Black Lives Matter. We've seen the Me Too movement and various other ones. They are very, very aware of power dynamics and systems. And so if you come from a traditional top-down authoritarian perspective, it's not going to work. You have to be inclusive and aware of power dynamics. They're suspicious of hegemonies. And that word simply means when you look at a group of leaders, just blow my nose here real quick, I apologize. Look at a group of leaders. Let's say you line up all the professors at Union College, and they were all white middle-aged men. A postmodern would be very uncomfortable with that. They would want to see some diversity. They would say, look, you've got basically carbon copies, of the same type of person. They want to see some diversity. They don't want to see things that all the same. And this is Generation Z as well, large value on diversity. And they are extremely wary of faith that is linked with politics. I remember when Donald Trump got elected as president, one of my more conservative deacons came and he's like, praise the Lord, God's man is in office. And you're just like, and it was, and I love him. He's a tremendous man, but you could just, the warmth in the room just got sucked right out of there. It was really awkward tension, and what are you going to say about that, pastor? And you're like, just everyone, let's focus on what we came here to do and not talk about that. But those kinds of statements and those kind of politicizing on Facebook, we all probably have people, if you're on Facebook, who post constant political stuff all the time. Don't do that. It will turn people off. They don't want to see your faith linked with politics. And there's good reason for that. I think especially from a Seventh-day Adventist perspective, we talk about religious liberty. Every time there has been a faith group that has aligned with the government, people die. It never works out well. And so they don't want to have a faith that is linked with politics. Any questions about postmodernism so far? Or do you kind of understand where they come from? Where this idea comes from? We'll talk a little bit more about it tomorrow. We only have a couple more minutes here. And I think I might save, I'll see what Pastor says. I might save this a little bit for tomorrow. I think we could cover it in a little bit. How much will you got? I got a few. We might be able to move quick. 10 minutes maybe? 5-10 minutes? We'll go for it. So there is a popular sentiment in academia, and it's fairly true that postmodernism is dead. It's done and gone. Now let me ask you this question. Based on some of the things that we've looked at, this idea of questioning everything and questioning power structures and everything's an interpretation, do you see postmodernism at play in people you talk to? Do you see these types of ideas and personalities online? Do you think this is a mindset that is still here? Okay, so we'll talk about him tomorrow. One author says postmodernism is dead, not because it doesn't exist, but because it has become such a part of the normal way of thinking, it's not a thing anymore, it's just the way we are. Does that make sense? So it's not like it's an exciting new thing to study in academia. Postmodernism showed up in the 70s, by the way, 60s and 70s. So it's not a new thing, but we have moved on. But a lot of the postmodern ways of looking at things and the types of questions people ask has just become part of our normal. It's just the way we are. And so what comes next, according to some theorists, is what we call meta-modernism. Started in the 1970s, and it continues to the present. And what's important to keep in mind about meta-modernism is a concept Raymond Williams talks about. He says it's the structure of feeling. It's a really helpful term to think about movements like the Enlightenment or postmodernism or meta-modernism or whatever ism that we're talking about. It's not like a concrete thing. It's like there's not like a meeting of the postmodernist society. We all determine what postmodernism is. It's more of a general mood that emerges in the arts, in popular culture, in philosophy, and so structure of feeling means there's kind of a general vibe that's happening in the surrounding cultures, but it's not necessarily a concrete thing. It hasn't solidified yet to where we can say that's what it is. Does that make sense? So it's just kind of a feeling, a sense about things. Meta can mean three different things in Greek. The first thing is it means after. That makes sense, right? It's after modernism. It's after postmodernism. It also means with. So in other words, it's not that it's something totally opposite of postmodernism or modern. It's sort of with it. And it's between. It's among. So it's not like it's a totally brand new thing. It's more of a continuation. And so one of the big ideas of metamodernism is an idea taken from Plato called metaxis. And it's this oscillation between two extremes. You're not just on this side and you're not just on this side. You just kind of move, you oscillate back and forth. So metamodern art, for example, will take events and things in real life, but it will give them an aura of the mystic. So in other words, it's going to have this really interesting grounding in real life, but the way it's portrayed has almost transcendent qualities. It's between two poles. Yes, real life, cynicism, hard reality, but also transcendent, heroic, and epic. And here's some examples. This is Pieta. This is Sir Anthony van Dyck in 1629. Kind of see, there's this particular image, and then we go to Pieta by Martin Whitworth. You see an animal there. There's the wound, almost like a wounded Christ figure, and then garbage and pollution coming out. Metamodern art is aesthetical. In other words, it's aesthetics combined with ethics. So this particular painting is an environmental message. It's using divine imagery to talk about the environment. So for metamodern, yes, this is divine art, this is tradition, this is more supernatural type things. This is concrete, grounded in reality, but we're still going to use allusions to the divine. So you kind of see both of these things at work here. Here's another one. Liberty leading the people, sort of this epic picture. There's a French flag and leading the charge here. And now you've got Rise. Now this is the protest of the 1%. But you can kind of see, look, here and here. It's a real thing that happened, but it's portrayed in mythic, epic tones. So you kind of get this idea how we're oscillating. Like it's real, but it's also mythic. And we're kind of fusing these two things together. Shia LaBeouf had this famous art display. He shows up at the Berlin Film Festival with a bag over his head that says, "I'm not famous anymore." Anyone pick up any irony in this art project here? You're a celebrity. You put a bag over your head that says, "I'm not famous anymore." But where is he? Is he on the red carpet? Or is there paparazzi taking pictures? Clearly, he's still famous. And so you've got this where, okay, he's protesting fame and he's protesting certain things, but he's doing those things at the same time. So you get this weird tension. You're at this pole and you're at the other pole, this idea and then this other idea at the same time. So metamodern characteristics, it's a cynicism that embraces naivety. I'm cynical about the world, we've made a mess of things, and yet I'm still going to try to be naive about it at the same time and hope for the best. We don't have justice for everybody, but I still believe that someday we will. Quirkiness, irony, and holding opposing ideas at once. And this is really difficult for Seventh-day Adventists who are very much, we've got the truth, this is our doctrines, here's what it is. How can you hold on to a falsehood and truth at the same time? It's challenging. People oscillate between material reality and myth. People who subscribe to science, who appreciate technology, will still dress up like Star Trek and go to Comic-Con and play in Fantasy World. And talk about the science in that mythic sci-fi world. So you have this oscillation between two different realities. Art must provide a call to social justice with transcendental feeling. We want real calls to real things, but it has to have a mythic quality about it at the same time. Rebuilding hopeful narratives that are grounded in more than intellectual assent to doctrine. And this is where it's going to hurt Adventists, because Adventists, in terms of our evangelism, is largely a child of modernity in the 19th century. Systematic charts, timelines, mass-produced. We actually have patented one conference, evangelism in a box. That does not fly with metamodernism. It's prepackaged, impersonal, not going to work. And we invest all this money just to get you the right doctrines, but what are you doing as a church? A millennial is going to look at your budget. A Generation Z is going to look at your budget and say, okay, so 80% goes to maintain your building and 20% goes to the community. So 80% is about you and 20% is about outreach. I'm not saying that's a fair assessment, but that's sort of you kind of get the mood of how they might approach budgeting. They want to see that you're doing more than just subscribing to doctrines. It is known to collapse distances between opposites. And so what does metamodern faith look like? It will end up being a religion that truly starts to function as this Marxist idea of the opiate of the masses. Life is so hard, there's so much suffering, there's so much wrong with the world, I need an escape, and religion starts becoming possibly that escape. You might see, and again, I say might for all of these because this is new enough, we're still seeing this, we're not sure. You might see an increase in church attendance and spiritual experimentation and greater involvement, but no true conversion. I'm here because the world is bad, I'm lonely, I'm cynical, I need something to do. I'm not necessarily really converted, but I'm still going to go through the motions anyway. Making peace with the broken world and focusing on the beauty of being and experience. We live in an experience economy. I want to just experience what it means to be alive. The world is broken. It's a mess. It's not getting any better. I'm going to try to find pockets of enjoyment somewhere. Eschatology, meaning our doctrine, our theology of the end times, that focuses on the world to come, such as Revelation of Hope, is going to feel cheesy to a metamodern, because it seems to bypass the very real suffering in the world. And so if your message is designed to say, hey, but look at what's coming in the future, and ignores the pain and suffering right now, it's going to fail with a metamodern audience. They want to know, I want you to acknowledge that things are broken, that things are painful, that they're suffering, and I want to do something about it if we can. Don't just tell me Jesus is coming soon. Yes, I'm Adventist pastor, professor, I believe that. But for a metamodern, they're going to say, what do I do? Do I just assent to these doctrines and sit in church now until Jesus comes? What are we doing? How are we alleviating suffering? And don't take my suffering and my pain and put a cliche on it or a Bible promise on it and not help me work through it. You're going to see rise of progressive occultism in attempt to re-enchant the world. There is a rise in occult imagery, in literature, in film, in arts, in an attempt to re-enchant the world. People want something more than a broken materialistic existence. And so, from an Adventist perspective, when we talk about our faith, how can we share the great controversy? in a way that doesn't seem so far away and detached from everything, in a way that makes God eminent and real now, not just whenever he decides to come? Is there a mythic, epic, transcendent quality to the Adventist message, or is it just a bunch of doctrines that we have a mental assent to and then we sit in church and wait for Jesus to come? It's principles for outreach. This is the last slide. We have to contextualize our message to speak meaningfully to suffering. We cannot do cliches. Well, God never promised us a hard life. That's not going to work. Oh. Generation Z's largest obstacle to faith, by the way, is the problem of pain. Pain. Mine's the problem of sneezing, but theirs is the problem of pain. So you're going to have to find a meaningful way to deal with the problem of suffering and to speak directly to it. And by the way, it's okay to say, I don't know. I'm not sure, and to validate, that's a good question. Faith must be an intimate and collective journey. I know, at least in the States, we have rampant individualism, and people are lonely. We need to do things as a community. It's not just, here's your doctrines, you believe this, you do your thing, and have your just your personal relationship with Jesus. There is a there's a collective communal life to this. It can't just be a checklist of do's and don'ts. I think earlier this morning somebody talked about how we define our faith typically by what we don't do. It's not going to work for a meta-modern. Okay, I know what we don't do. What do we do? What does it mean to be a Seventh-day Adventist? What does it mean to be a Christian? People need something meaningful to do to improve the lives of others right now. They can't just hope for a better future. I mean, they do, but they really want to be involved with something concrete now. And I'll close with this. Invitational rhetoric over traditional rhetoric. So traditional rhetoric, logos, pathos, ethos, is designed for me to get in a debate with you and to win an argument or to score points. I'm going to build my case, and I'm going to argue you into the faith. I'm going to demonstrate why I'm right, and you're just going to have to accept it. It's not going to work with this audience. What you need is what's called invitational rhetoric. Invitational rhetoric is rooted in the telling of our personal stories. This is what has been meaningful for me. Tell me your story. That's interesting. Tell me more. And it's much more of a give and take versus a debate. And oftentimes, we're going to have to set aside that wanting to be right, or we're just going to have to listen and then ask for permission to tell our story and hopefully build bridges and invite them into what I believe, because I've heard testimonies all weekend long, is a wonderful congregation that is doing things that matter in the community. And we can start building bridges. That is a lot to dump on you in an afternoon. It's a lot of information. So thank you for listening, and we'll pick up the conversation tomorrow morning.
Professor Pierce, we want to say thank you for coming to Edmonton South. I know it's been a long time. The invitation came over a year, and you've been here. We have been blessed, and I don't know about you. I have been blessed. Have you been blessed? It was an eye-opener. We have learned, and if only you could come and teach at Birdman, we could have you more often down here. With that being said, a token of appreciation, we have this give back. Inside there is a handmade card. So it wasn't bought at a store. It was handmade just for you by one of our young adults. It's a token of appreciation just to say, thank you so much, preacher.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
It's been wonderful.
Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we will have our brunch and breakfast. And tell us a little bit more about tomorrow at 10 a.m., what we're going to cover.
So tomorrow, I'm good. So tomorrow we're going to look at, I think we've talked about getting some questions together if people have particular questions, and doing some Q&A. We're also going to look at missiology as it relates to media. In other words, how is media playing a role in shaping the next generation? What sort of things do we have to be aware of, and how do we engage particularly Generation Z that is immersed in what some would call mixed reality. You know, and so what are sort of the trends? How is it shaping the way we think? And what can we do to make a connection?
There's a term that you used, screenagers.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about
So
that.
Barna's latest research on Generation Z talks about it is the rise of the screenager. And so much of social life is brokered by social media and mobile technology. And that has certain effects on the way we operate. And so we'll talk about more about that tomorrow.
I'm going to be there. I don't know about you. Also, if you have any questions, write them down so we can get to engage those questions. Ideally, if you have those questions and we can get them sooner, and then we can give them to Pastor Pierce. If you have a pen, here's a phone number. You can text your question to this number. You ready? Everybody has a phone. I know you're looking at your phones when I preach. So the phone number is 780-707-6365. It might show up a name on your phone. So text your questions over there. And then tomorrow morning, he has a brief presentation and then answer questions, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue. We hope to see you tomorrow. We have good food prepared for you. So show up, 10 a.m. we eat. And God bless you. Let's have a word of prayer before we exit. Gracious, loving Father, thank you that you care. Thank you that you always provide people that are willing to teach, to encourage, to educate us, Lord, to be able to minister to the needs of those that are around us. We thank you for the ministry of Dr. Pierce. He travels extensively, but he was able to join us this afternoon, this weekend, and be with his family back in Nebraska. Bless them abundantly. Send us home, Father. Bring us back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. to learn again. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Good night, everybody.